What's happening, sports fans? Welcome back for another video. I am your host, Johnny Gaz. Thank you so much for coming back. Today, we are switching gears. We are going to shift from offense to defense as we hit the positional breakdown for the defensive line for the 2024 Detroit Lions. Come on, let's go. As we know, the Lions are entering a very important offseason. They were one half of football away from a Super Bowl berth, the organization's first ever. Unfortunately, they fell just a bit short, and we're going to go through one of the main reasons why today. In a previous video here at Johnny Gaz Sports, we talked about the offensive and defensive coordinators coming back for 2024. What a great way to continue all of the good that you had in the previous few seasons. There were chances that both of those coordinators could have taken jobs elsewhere in this offseason. They have agreed to come back. The continuity will continue. That is going to be a fantastic way to enter the 2024 offseason. So we're going to pick up right from there and discuss the Lions' defensive line. And before we go any further, make sure to like the video if you're digging the vibe here at Johnny Gaz Sports. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the alert so you don't miss any future videos here with the channel. Thank you guys so much. So the Lions defense over the last few years has really been their bugaboo. Their offense has shown that it can hit elite status. And as we enter 2024, that looks to only continue. Again, with the return of Ben Johnson, you expect to have another good draft. There may be small moves in free agency. We'll get into that a little bit later in the video. But there is a lot of good in that offense for the Detroit Lions. On the other side of the ball is where all the questions really come into play. They had a difficult time defending the pass. At the end of the season and into the playoffs, it was perfectly clear that they could not defend a number one wide receiver. It didn't matter who was at quarterback. They were putting up huge air numbers against the Detroit Lions. One of the biggest reasons why is because they could not get sustained pressure on the quarterback. Sacks were a problem for the Detroit Lions in 2023 and even before that. Aiden Hutchinson is a fantastic young player. He is ascending into superstar status. He has shown that he can put pressures on better than anyone else in the National Football League. The problem is if you don't have someone next to you eating up blocks, putting pressure on, that allows the offense on the other side to have to pay attention to other folks on the defensive line, it's preventing him from ultimately being the player I think we all know that he can be. So it is going to be very important that the Lions make the right moves this offseason on the defensive line to ensure that they take the next step. Today, we're going to review the current depth chart of the defensive line of the Detroit Lions. We're also going to look at the stats coming off of 2023. We'll also dive into the free agents that could potentially be leaving the Lions this offseason, as well as some free agent targets the Lions could pursue to either replace those holes or bolster the defensive line here into 2024. We'll also touch on the draft approach for the Detroit Lions and Brad Holmes, as well as what they could do in the draft to ultimately supplement their defensive line. We'll end with some final thoughts by Johnny Gaz and what I think will happen as the Lions enter the 2024 season on their defensive line. Again, let's dive into it. Here is the Lions' current depth chart as we leave 2023 and enter the 2024 offseason. Let's focus our attention on the defensive lines, the defensive ends, and the defensive tackles. Starting at the top, our big-time player, the guy we're starting this video with, the guy we have to have playing at his full potential if we're going to get to the Super Bowl and ultimately win it, is Aiden Hutchinson. He is the cog of this defense. He is the motor that makes everything else run. He has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he has second-level motor. He never stops. He keeps going no matter what. His pressure levels are elite. His sacks as we ended the 2023 season started to get to elite status. He ended with 11.5. We'll look at that in just a moment. But again, he is the main piece to this defense and this defensive line. Past that, on the edge, you have John Kaminsky. He's been with the Lions organization for several seasons. I would say that he had a much better 2022 season than he did here in 2023. A little bit of an injury bug crept up on him, and he didn't give as much production, I think, as you would have liked to see on the other end of Aiden Hutchinson, and we'll talk about what we can do to move forward there. On the interior defensive line, you have Aleem McNeil, a huge run-stuffing and man-eating defensive player. He actually has proven to be a very good second to Aiden Hutchinson. The problem is he also kind of hit the injury bug this year, and he's only one man. He doesn't play every down, and if he's not getting sustained pressures, if he's not eating up a double team, on a majority of plays, again, you're leaving Aiden Hutchinson and whoever else is on the edge on an island. So we'll talk about, again, many ways that we might be able to supplement not only the edge position, but also defensive tackle. So moving out away from the starters, again, Aiden Hutchinson, John Kaminsky on the edges typically. Your seconds, Romeo Okwara, Josh Pascal as well on the edge. On the interior defensive tackle position, the Lions picked up Tyson Alualu from the Pittsburgh Steelers during, I think it was over the free agent period in 2023. He didn't really give you a ton of production, but was a good body in the interior of the defensive line. At the end of the season and into the playoffs. You also have a young player, Broderick Martin, who they're hoping to get a little bit more of as they get into the 2024 season. I think between him and Josh Pascal, those two young guys you're really hoping to get more of as we move forward. Past that, I think the other name worth mentioning here is Levi Onwuzurike. He has been hit with injury bugs during his entire career with the Detroit Lions, but he's only 25 years old. He made a few plays here and there towards the end of the season and even in the playoffs. So he's a guy that has a lot of question marks, and we'll get into him and the rest of the defensive line situation here as we move forward. The other guys you see here, Charles Harris, Mitchell Agood, and Matthew Betts, who they just recently signed from the Canadian Football League. We're not going to spend a ton of time on. I think those are guys that ultimately will be looking to just make the cut, maybe potential practice squad guys, but I don't think they truly factor into our discussion here today. All right, let's dive into some defensive stats. Let's actually look at how this defense was in 2023. Again, we opened the video with the overall explanation of the Lions defense. That has been their downfall here, and I think the reason why they can't get to the next level. They really need to supplement with some players either in free agency or the draft, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's dive into these numbers here. Let's stay away from the offensive side of the football. We know how good the offense has been and can be as we enter the 2024 season. But let's look at the defensive numbers. Points, they rank 23rd overall. That's not good. Average yards play, 26th, which is pretty incredible. Pass yards, this is a huge focus here. They were 29th in the league giving up pass yards, 22nd in pass attempts, 31st in pass yards average per game. These are numbers that you just can't ignore. Ultimately, in their back end, they could not defend big-time wide receivers. They could not stop the pass. That is the bottom line. They just couldn't do it. Their cornerbacks were a shuffling mess during the season. You had guys like Jerry Jacobs. You had guys like Kindle Vildor. Cameron Sutton did decent job as far as being a number one cornerback, sort of in a number two body, right? We talked about that in a previous video. But ultimately, we just could not defend the pass. Now, the biggest argument here, and the reason why we bring that up in this particular video discussing the defensive line, is that I think a lot of the reason why we could not defend the pass is because we could not get sustained pressure on the quarterback. Guys were able to make plays and be athletic enough to extend plays to be able to pass the ball down the field on this Lions team. There were moments in games and periods of time where the Lions just could not get pressure and ultimately could not get to the quarterback. They cannot defend athletic quarterbacks. Guys like Jalen Hurts, obviously Patrick Mahomes. Nobody really defends him, but you get the point. Okay, when the Lions come up facing those kind of quarterbacks, and even guys that just have just enough athleticism. We see a guy like Mullins from the Vikings towards the end of the season. They had to play them a couple times because of the Kirk Cousins injury. Well, Mullins tore them up. Now, he's not Michael Vick, and he's not Mr. Athletic, but he's athletic enough to make a few plays that just clearly burned the Lions in the pass game. So again, the biggest point here is that I believe the defensive line not having sustained enough pressure hurt their back end and ultimately hurt their pass stat numbers that we looked at here. Now here's a more raw number side of the statistics. Let's focus first on the tackle numbers. We know Alex Anzalone, linebacker, has really become one of the faces of the defense with Aiden Hutchinson and a few other guys, led the team in tackles. A guy like Jack Campbell, a rookie, third in tackles on the team behind Kirby Joseph. I think that's also a good sign for your linebacking core. And I think ultimately Aaron Glenn's defense showed that they have enough athleticism in the back end to help with their pass rush. But ultimately, I think they'd like to peel that back. Aaron Glenn showed that he had to make those adjustments towards the back end of the season to be able to get more pressure. That's not really his defensive philosophy, or at least hasn't been in the first half of 2023 and prior to that in previous seasons. So I think they'd like to get back to a situation where they can rush just 4 guys. So let's focus on a few numbers here. We're looking at tackles. I guess what you notice is up front on the defensive line, defensive end, defensive tackles, they're not really our primary tacklers on this defense. We also talked about the sack numbers. Now, we know Aiden Hutchinson there with 11.5. That's a fantastic number for his second season in the league, and I think he continues that ascension as long as he stays healthy and as long as the Lions are able to get what they need on the defensive line to get him the help. Past that, though, is where we have this issue. We talked a little bit about Aleem McNeil. He also had 5 sacks, which is a good number for a defensive tackle whose ultimate responsibility is just to eat up people. So that's a good number for him. But past that, there's nothing. That's a nothing burger. 3 sacks for Alex Anzalone, Ife Melifonwu again in the back end. We're trying to get away from that. So you need guys to have sacks up front. Defensive edge, defensive tackle. We didn't get that from many other players. Aiden Hutchinson and Aleem McNeil were our 2 guys. And if Aleem McNeil's not on the field, then Aiden Hutchinson is left on an island on his own. And it reflects here in this sack number. All right, so as we enter the 2024 offseason, we need to look at the free agents potentially leaving the organization. A few different groups of guys here, but let's focus on a few primary folks that we're going to have to pay attention to. Number 1, let's rule out Charles Harris. I think he has not given the organization enough production. I think he was a healthy scratch even towards the end of the year. I don't think they're bringing him back. I think he's out of the discussion. Benito Jones, sort of a secondary defensive tackle behind Aleem McNeil. I think that's a situation where we see what else is happening on the defensive line before you just sign him back. But I think you get him at a decent number either way. So he may just be in the mix because he's a good body on the defensive tackle. Romeo Okwara is kind of a different story. He got a pretty decent-sized contract with the Lions here. Let's pull that up and talk about that in some detail. It says Romeo Okwara signed a 3-year, $37 million contract with the Detroit Lions, including a $14 million signing bonus with $25 million guaranteed. That's not good. He has not given you the production to justify that number. So unfortunately, I think he also could be somebody who leaves the organization unless he takes a huge hometown discount. I don't know if other teams ultimately look at him the same way. I think he's probably towards the bottom end of edge rushers, free agent-wise, at least for other teams. So I don't know if he necessarily picks up elsewhere. And ultimately, I don't know if the Lions are going to pay him to bring him back. Now let's look at some free agent targets potentially for the Detroit Lions on the defensive line. Before we get into that, we have to start with the Brad Holmes philosophy and approach to free agents. He came out at the end of his 2023 season during his press conferences and basically told the Detroit media, don't expect some huge splash moves. The moves we've made have paid off. He actually cashed in some receipts on certain folks there in that room. And he's telling basically everyone in the media, the fans, that they're not really looking to just throw money at big-time players. The reason being is they're going to have to save that money for these pillars or these foundational pieces that we've talked about in previous videos. Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We just came off of a video on the wide receivers looking at him in detail. I believe you have to pay guys like him, and it's going to cost a lot of money. The Lions have about $45 million in effective cap space, give or take. But a lot of that money even is going to be used towards those foundational pieces. So we have to think about that as we look at some of these free agent targets. Starting at the edge position, guys like Josh Allen, Brian Burns seem to be the 2 guys most sought after in free agency as far as the defensive end position. I believe those 2 guys will cost themselves out of being a potential target for the Lions. So we're going to move forward past them here today. The one big name on the edge that I will mention and bring up today as a possible target would be from the Minnesota Vikings, Danielle Hunter. The last free agent period in the 2023 season, I think, saw the Lions possibly look at him as potential to bring him in as that other piece. It didn't happen, obviously. They really didn't make a move on the line that made a big difference. Well, I think if there is going to be just one move that they make, it could potentially be here. I think Danielle Hunter kind of fits the bill for the type of player the Lions are looking for. It would be a great bookend to Aiden Hutchinson, and I think a great landing spot here for the Lions if they decide they're going to make a one splash move. I think if they make that here, then it probably excludes, let's say, another cornerback or defensive back help that I think they need as well, at least as far as a big splash. So they're going to have to make a decision how to wisely use the money. In my opinion, if you're going to spend money on the edge, I think Danielle Hunter is one of your good options. I think another good possible option at defensive edge is Zadarius Smith coming from the Cleveland Browns. He's actually already been linked to the Lions, and it's a guy that they can move all over their formation along with Hutch. I think it'd be a good fit piece there as well. So there's another guy that may be a little bit less than Danielle Hunter, maybe a little bit more cost-friendly as far as their cap hit. So definitely keep this guy in mind as well as a potential free agent target for the Lions. Okay, now let's look at the defensive tackles, potential free agent targets. Again, I think we need to exclude some of the large names involved here. I don't think the Lions are players with Chris Jones as much as I'd like them to be a player for Justin Metabukwe from Baltimore. Again, I think he's going to be too high priced. They're not going to be willing to spend that money. So the player that I want to bring up today that I keep hearing over and over again is defensive lineman Grover Stewart from the Indianapolis Colts. This is a massive man. He is a man-eater. I think along with Aleem McNeil, if you paired them up in the middle, I think you are creating havoc that allows the defensive edge to just do whatever they want, basically. The problem here, I think, is more of a culture fit thing. Grover Stewart served a 6-game suspension for performance-enhancing drugs. I don't know too much more past that, but ultimately the Lions culture really doesn't typically go for these kind of players or guys that have a history of that. So that may just exclude him right there. But ultimately the talent speaks for itself. Again, if their main concern is maybe getting another defensive tackle rather than edge, this may be a very good option as far as the price compared to the player that you're getting. So definitely keep Grover Stewart in your head. And then more so on the wishful thinking side, but also thinking about the cap and what makes a lot of sense for the Lions in 2024 are guys like Fletcher Cox or Calais Campbell. Obviously very much towards their end of their careers, and it would be a one-year deal for both of these gentlemen. But that's what I think works for the Lions in their current cap structure and what they're trying to do with the money as far as paying those pillar players. If they get one-year deals, guys, they're not concerned with paying big-time money over several years down the road where that hurts them in paying those other guys. So, again, do I think they may pull the trigger? You know, a guy like Fletcher Cox, I don't know. He's kind of been linked, I think, to the Cleveland Browns already. Calais Campbell, maybe more of an actual realistic option. He's a guy that's looking for a Super Bowl, and the Lions are certainly contenders now. So I think on that end of it, these guys could be good pieces in those one-year deal. All right, let's talk draft targets potentially for the Detroit Lions here in 2024. We know the draft is going to be held in Detroit this year, which is fantastic. Should be a great show. But ultimately, I think experts and anyone here will say to you that the Lions need to focus on the defense. Now, it will depend on what happens in free agency as well. But ultimately, let's go through a few potential targets here for the Detroit Lions. One of the biggest names I see popping up over and over and over again, and I think this would be more if the Lions stick at the pick number 29 here, was Chop Robinson out of Penn State. He is, like it says here, a freak athlete. On the edge would be a bookend to Aiden Hutchinson. He is superbly athletic. He didn't put up huge sack numbers at Penn State, but ultimately I think in pairing him up with Aiden, you have two athletic freaks on both sides of the field. I really believe that that would be a tough thing for offenses to deal with. Again, on both sides, speed, power, really a little bit of everything. It would be a really great mix, and I think a good spot there. So Chop Robinson out of Penn State definitely could be an option at 29. Some of the other players that keep popping up from my research is Darius Robinson, another edge rusher there. He's out of Mizzou, so coming out of the SEC, big-time play there. And if you could prove yourself on the edge there in the SEC, I think it's a good fit for the Lions. Another name would be Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. more of an interior defensive lineman, but a guy that obviously Detroiters, Michiganders are familiar with. Would be a nice compliment to Aiden Hutchinson. You got the Michigan connection, and he was a really good player. So again, if you're looking more on the interior, that may be a good way to go as well. Those are just a few guys. I think you're going to see a lot more develop as we get closer to the draft. I will have a full draft preview for the Detroit Lions, so be on the lookout for that as we get closer and closer to that first draft in Detroit City. All right, so let's get my final thoughts. What do the Lions do with their defensive line as they enter 2024? We opened up this video with Aiden Hutchinson, and we're going to end it with Aiden Hutchinson. He is the piece that will make this motor run. Defensively on the line, we have to build off of him. I think their number one priority in free agency and the draft is to solidify their defensive line. They have to find help for Hutch. Get somebody on the other end or more beef in the middle so that they can eat up folks so Aiden Hutchinson can feed on that. I think that is priority one. They also need to be hopeful that some of these guys in the background continue to develop. Again, they're not going to pour a ton of money free agent-wise. If they make a splash move, I think that would be it. I don't think they're adding multiple pieces in free agency. I think, if anything, they add one piece and then supplement more in the draft. So they're going to need guys in the background to come up. Guys like Le'Veon Zurike. Guys like Pascal, Broderick Martin. A guy we didn't even mention because he wasn't on the depth chart here as we left the 2023 season is James Houston. He was putting up historic numbers in his rookie year. Unfortunately, he did get hurt, and he got hurt in 2023. So you really didn't get to see what potential he really had or if that potential was going to hold true. You really need him to step up, but I don't think that's something you can ultimately just rely on or count on. Even if he is that player, I think you still need to add more pieces. So that still is priority one. If you do that, and then you also make some smart moves in your back end, Brad Holmes continues to show that he can draft as well as he has an historic draft last year. If he even does half of that this year, think about what they've set themselves up for. So this organization, I think, is moving in the right direction. And with a few minor tweaks, especially on the defensive line, I think they can move to the next level. Are we talking a Lions Super Bowl in 2024? Man, do I hope so. But I'll tell you what, I think it certainly starts right here. Thank you guys so much for coming along for another video. I appreciate it so much. Make sure to slap that like button if you dug what happened here today, and hit that subscribe and notify bell so you don't miss any future videos here with Johnny Gaz Sports. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to come back on the next one. Have a fantastic day.